Thanks for joining me, Suo. Before we dive into the finance around Elite, I'd like to touch on your Elite Dangerous journey. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey with Elite so far?
Yeah, sure, Mauro. So I bought Steam, or I bought Elite on Steam, I should say, because it looked interesting and it was relatively cheap. I picked it up, I think, February of 2020. That sounds about right, February. And I was pretty bad in the beginning, right? I mean, comical Sidewinder landing all the time. I think I was halfway to the core in a completely E-rated DBX that had weapons on it, trying to explore with economical or economic jumps turned on when I joined Argus. And I remember I was bragging to you. I was like, "Yeah, I've found at least like 100 gas giants," and you were like, "Oh, that's pretty good, I guess. Like, good job." you know.
Those big gas bells, yep.
Um, yeah, thanks. That's gonna get you about 1 million credits. Good job. And I worked my way up from Ensign to Commodore. I am now a very seasoned explorer. I think in exploration credits alone, I'm at 16.2 billion credits. I have something ridiculous like 7,200 efficient scan bonuses. Triple Elite, Elite 5 in Exploration and Xeno, Elite 3 in Trade. And I've got somewhere close to a little bit over 20 days played now in Elite Dangerous.
All right. Just quickly, I would like to point out that is LYR bonus with the exploration. So, some of the other seasoned exploration boys will be like, that doesn't count.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I do have somewhere around I don't know 56 billion right now in game, something like that. So
Yes, a little bit more than me. Um,
I have some space dollary dues, as you might say.
oh, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, now, because we are delving into the finance details and reports, would you mind giving us a bit of your professional background?
Yes. So I have my bachelor's of science in economics with a focus in data analysis. I obtained my master's in finance and financial management. My work history has spanned a little bit over a decade. I worked at a very large investment firm in the United States that handles retirement accounts for just about everyone. Moved from that to a telecommunications company also in the United States where I handled a lot of their capital expense or what we call CapEx budget. From there, I ended up in lending with a focus on automotive. And most recently, I have joined a consumer discretionary company to help run their mergers and acquisitions organization.
Well, I'm just going to put it out there. That's substantially more than me. Fancy degrees, Mr. Professional. Thank you.
yes.
Um,
Thank you.
now, with that, let's start off with the FY23 financial results. Now, look, others have spoken on this previously, but I feel that it wasn't exactly broken down well. Whether that be due to their lack of experience compared to you, or whether bit of doom and gloom kind of thing. Could you break down the highlights for us?
Yeah, let's kind of take a look at how Frontier framed everything they sent to investors, and they really wanted to harp on how their strategy is shifting, right? The bold theme on the beginning of the deck is entering new realms, and then if that wasn't broken down enough for you, you go down another page and they spell it out as refining our strategy, right? And they have some interesting commentary from the chairman and the CEO. So David Wilton, the chairman, his defining theme at the top of his letter is a year of transition. Johnny Watts, the CEO of Frontier, he says getting back on track. So it's really important when you look at their financials to understand that Frontier has said, look, the strategy we were working with before, it's just not working out the way we want it to. This year is going to be a year where we say we're kind of taking all the things that didn't work, we're writing up whatever we can for losses, we're moving it on, and we're starting a different approach or a different strategy, which I think is pretty reasonable for them. The big highlights they do call out specific to last year was that their strategy for Foundry which was kind of this idea they had to almost compete against like Unreal Engine, right? They said that that was horrible. It just didn't do anything for them. So the board said we are unwinding that business case, which means we're done with this. We're not doing Foundry supported games anymore. We're really not trying to build up this really big brand as a developer. We're going to focus more on games or intellectual property we create as opposed to being the back end for games. They then went on to say that F1 really wasn't as lucrative of a franchise as they originally thought it was, and that's a pretty tough one for them, right? I mean, they took a big loss on writing down the value of the brand, which we'll cover a bit more later. Um, but it's hard for them too because they have to pay subscription costs. They have to appease the actual owners of the F1 IP. It is most certainly not Frontier. So that's kind of a tricky conversation to have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the other highlight from last year was that Frontier completed its very first acquisition, and they purchased a
Of.
developer in Canada called Complex.
Mm-hmm. I know that we definitely saw that a few times across their social media.
Mhm.
I particularly wasn't following it, but I'm not too sure if you were.
It wasn't really like something I got, really, really into. Taking a look at what the deal terms were, Frontier did pay about 8.4 million pounds upfront to do the acquisition, and then there is an incremental acquisition which they are offering basically in the form of we call it deferred compensation incentives, big air quotes there. Just think
Mm-hmm.
performance bonuses, right?
That makes more
In
sense.
many ways, the complex acquisition looks like it's a focus on, hey, we want these 25 or so really high skilled developers. It's great that they bring some IP along with them in terms of the Warhammer franchise, but these 25 people, we really want to keep them. So we're going to pay big money to buy them, and then we're going to offer them big money to deliver games for us.
Now, that's a bit of money to be throwing around. Do you think that they've got their money's worth?
It's way too early to tell. I mean, the trick with a lot of these acquisitions is there's usually a pretty long-term business case behind it, right? So, if you're pitching, hey, we want to buy this company because they have 25 really quality employees, and we want those quality employees to release, let's say, 2 or 3 games a year for us. You're going to have a demo or a mock-up built to say, we think each game's going to perform X amount, right? And it's going to give us this many dollars each time they do it. But you won't be able to say was it successful or not for at least 4 or 5 years. And you should expect in the beginning that it might be a bit awkward, right? People are transitioning onto your platform, they're transitioning onto your software. We know Frontier chooses to do a lot of their coding in Cobra, which is a unique platform to Frontier. So even if these 20 or 25 people are somewhat familiar, I'm sure there is a bit of a learning curve for the first game.
Yeah, it's look. I've worked with quite a fair few engineers slash developers. Yeah, look, I can definitely vouch for even just coming to a new company that you're already familiar with that particular code. It's still going to take them a minute to get adjusted. So it's
Yeah.
reasonable to say that they are already looking for the long term. That they are kind of setting down the foundations to be able to go the mile. They're not just going to close down next year.
They've definitely thrown some money at this transition. I mean, they're to be bringing on a whole nother group to do development for new games and to say we're really going to focus on building new games in-house. I think they're putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak. And in terms of the general financial highlights, things weren't particularly dire for them this year. They did look a bit risky at one point, but they capped out the year with revenues being ever so slightly down compared to last year, but still up quite a bit compared to their 5-year average. Their gross profits, which is the money you make after covering the expenses that are only related to your product, which in this case is games, right?
Hmm.
Was down by just a little bit. And the board highlighted in the report that that was related to subscription expenses, meaning, the IPs that you're basically paying for permission to develop games on. And their expenses related to development were pretty high. They spent 52.9 million pounds on development. And unfortunately for them, 9.6 million of those pounds were quote unquote foundry pounds, right? So those are probably some level of loss in many ways.
Yeah, okay. Look, they took a gamble and it apparently didn't pay off. Um,
It happens.
yeah,
Yep.
look, fair enough. I know that we can see that they have an adjusted EBITDA loss of £4.6 million, or roughly 5.8 million in freedom currency. Now, that's a substantial amount of dollar dues for me. What's your thoughts on a loss of this size?
Yeah, I'm not particularly worried. Before we dive down why I'm not worried, let's talk about EBITDA, or as you call it,
Yeah, I
EBITDA.
look, it's a
Yeah,
new
no
term for
worries.
me.
So EBITDA is in many ways considered, um, one of the better ways to measure performance. And the reason people like EBITDA is it's kind of the middle of the income statement. So we've worked through how much money did you bring in? We've worked through, how much did your games cost to do that? And we've gone a little bit deeper. We've even covered, how much did marketing cost? How much did, administrative expenses, right? Like corporate and anything else cost. We're down to a number where it's before we get into the funky business of interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So EBITDA is literally an acronym and it stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And again, really quick snippet. The reason we like that number is because it's before a lot of the quote unquote monkey business that comes in with the more complex tax codes and changes. So to get back to the 5.8 million freedom currency or
Mm-hmm.
4.6 million EBITDA loss, um, Frontier does have a pretty good talking point on this. They actually cover quite a few things in their like 2 or 3 pager letter to investors. They point out, as I mentioned earlier, that F1 had a write down, right? And F1 has this thing called intangible value. Every brand does. And that's kind of like your shot in the dark guess at what is the value of this brand, right? When people approach Frontier and they want to play games, what would they be potentially willing to part ways with to play F1 with us, right? Frontier writing F1 down says, hey, we thought it was worth, this much. We're now realizing either through public performance or through feedback, it maybe isn't worth quite as much as we thought it was. So we're going to write that down a bit. Um, the other thing that Frontier calls out, and this is going to be a theme for this coming earnings as well for Frontier next year, is they are sharpening their amortization curve. That's not a word I made up. It is just a
Mm-hmm.
big, scary word. It's amortization. And the reason they're sharpening this curve is because they've had write downs before, right? No big secret here. Last year's write down was Elite Dangerous Odyssey. That didn't go the way they wanted it to.
Not even slightly.
F1 F1 has kind of gone the same way, right? Unfortunately, and that kind of reflects this perspective in Frontier that game brand values decrease faster than they expected. And do you think we should probably do an example for amortization? Just kind of walk through that. Yeah,
Look, some Argus officers might be wondering what exactly it is. Not me, obviously, but do you mind
of
explaining
course,
it?
of course, yeah. So let's put it into perspective of a factory, right? So we're opening Maro's factory of autocannon bullets, right? It's going to
Hmm.
be a great factory. It's going to make lots of bullets.
Obviously.
Um, when you build this factory, the tax authority recognizes that the value of the factory is not all realized immediately, right? I mean, it's going to take me a long time to start producing things. This building is going to be useful for me for 30 years, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the agreement between you and the tax authority, and this is true of just about every tax authority on Sol, if you will, is hey, we know this is going to take you a long time to realize the benefits. We will let you offset part of the cost each year for the next 30 years. Now, that doesn't mean every year I get to say, hey, Maro's factory cost 20 million pounds. Therefore, I lost 20 million pounds every year, right? The tax authority is smarter than that. They say, okay, for the first 5 years you have this factory, it's really valuable. You could sell it to another Commodore, or you could sell it to another squad and they'd love to buy it. So you can write off a little more than you normally would. Whereas on the last 5 years of the factory, it's kind of broken down. The building itself really isn't a nice building anymore. You're thinking about moving. Tax authority knows, and that's why at the end of the schedule, your write-downs are kind of small, right?
Okay.
And that's basically what amortization is it's this ability to say I'm spending a really big amount of money right now to create a productive asset. Let me offset my profits with this asset that reasonably matches the life of that asset.
Okay. That makes a little bit more sense to me. And any
glad i
business
could
that I
glad I could help
start
with that.
is going to be obviously amazing. So, okay.
That's right. So one other highlight with the EBITDA that I want to point out, and this was something Frontier really wanted to call attention to, and that's that there were new tax code changes under the Video Games Tax Relief Act in Great Britain, which is allowing Frontier to reduce taxable profits more than expected. And Frontier also points out, word for word in their document, that if you added back in the cash that they spent on Complex and the 3 million they spent on shares for the Employee Benefit Trust, Frontier actually would have ended the year with more cash this year compared to last.
That sounds better than what I have ever heard from anyone else so far. That, look, the 4.6 million loss, straight off, I'm like, okay, that's pretty bad. They're not that big of a company. I don't know how much they have in their cash reserves. That was concerning.
Mhm.
When you actually delve into it a bit more like this, it's like, okay, I think they're a little bit better off than the doom and gloom that we keep on hearing.
Yeah, I'm not thinking that they're by any means, staring the potential end of their company in the face. I'm sure it is a scary time at Frontier, though, right? I mean,
We did have those
uh,
layoffs or the
you've
redundancies.
had you've had a lot of cost efficiencies, right? So we've had the
That's not a fancy
layoffs, we've
word.
had yes, buzzword there
Hmm.
for you. You've had a lot of things being postponed or pushed back, and candidly, you don't want to hear from the helm, hey, the previous strategy isn't working. We're working on what the next strategy is going to be, right? That's not a message you want to hear from the captain of the ship. You want to hear that things are going right, we're heading in the right direction. But in their defense, I think it's great that they're willing to acknowledge that it wasn't working because I think that's plain to a lot of people.
Yeah, true. And look, coming from someone that has been at a company that has gone through redundancies previously, in my experience, Frontier has actually handled this a lot better than the companies in my, employment history.
Mhm.
So I will give them credit to that. It seems that they've been able to handle it a little bit better. Was there room for improvement? Of course. Look, everyone always will. But as
That's
far as
the uh,
okay,
that's the old adage that hindsight's 2020, right?
yeah, 100%.
Yep.
Now I know that Frontier does have a host of games that we've been touching on, but let's be honest, you and I and all the other commanders out there are a little bit more interested in how this report can give us insight into the future funding and development of Elite. Now, within the actual report, I did my little control F. Elite is only mentioned it's 7 times, but one of those is just a reference. It's realistically only mentioned 6 times. Now, it does say that it still delivered a material revenue. My two questions are: is material revenues just referring to money made after expenses? And is the effort that we are seeing and have seen in 2024 so far a bit of a, is it a last ditch effort to keep, the Elite Dangerous revenue stream alive? Or is it, do you think that this is maybe going to be their continued effort?
Yeah, this is the big one.
Yeah.
Let's kind of address each of those, right? So, you're right. We don't really get a clear picture from their financials or their investor deck on Elite Dangerous's future, right? There are some cookie crumbs, if you will, that are
Mm-hmm.
kind of hidden in the document. Frontier does call on page 6 Elite their first self-published game, which, and we kind of took out a whole bunch of other things here, but it's still referring to Elite,
Mm-hmm.
greatly exceeded the original vision for the game. I think that um, that's an interesting quote from them. I know a lot of people listening to this are going to say, hey, but I heard about all these other things that were promised when Elite was launched. Well, from a financials perspective, is what we're really focused on here.
Yeah.
Whether features are in or not in the game, they're not worried about that in the investor deck. And then on page 24, Frontier also says Frontier continues to support Elite Dangerous and looks forward to more and more commanders stepping up to engage with Odyssey over time, which tells me that there is at least a strategy for Elite when they made this, investor relations deck, and that strategy is continued quote unquote acquisition, right? They want to get more people to buy the game itself and to play it. Um, I wouldn't say any efforts right now that are active are last ditch. In my opinion, Frontier is kind of dipping their toe into the water, and I'm sure they're doing this in a variety of waters, and trying to see, what does the water feel like? Can I get a response from it, right? Uh, Personally, I think the current scheme for arcs is clever. It is not congruent with their original strategy of getting more people to buy the base game. This is a bit of a different approach, right? This is kind of trying to monetize the existing player base in Elite. I do think the business case is going to respond strangely, though. And what I mean by that is that, we get free arcs for activity in game, right? You get 400 a week,
Mm-hmm.
or I should say up to 400 a week. And I think there are quite a few people in the community who have these, rather large arcs balances built up.
Look, one of
So,
our Argus commanders actually logged in the other day. It turns out he's got about 36,000 arcs. He's never bought a
yep.
single penny, but him and I have been playing for what, last 4 or 5 years. The Look, I'm going to jump in and quickly say something controversial. I'm not too sure if I agree with the steady earning of arcs. I think that it could potentially decrease someone's desire or need to actually buy arcs to begin with. If we do, and I understand that my this might be a minority, but I can, from a finance, I love earning them, but from a finance point, I'm like, wouldn't it be better for them just to get rid of the earning arcs?
I think that all boils down to a matter of quote unquote unitary economics, as we would call it, which basically just means, the economy of arcs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm rewarding you 400 arcs for playing the game in a week, which any MMO is going to want people to play, right?
Yeah,
If
of
no one's
course.
playing the game, it's toast, it's done. I'm awarding you, hypothetically, up to 20,800 arcs per year. That is if you are hitting it every week and you are playing all the time. As far as Frontier is concerned, you're a fantastic player, right? Heavy user, they love it. Uh, to give you early access to a ship for 3 months for almost three-quarters of that balance, eh, it doesn't seem like I'm giving away necessarily the whole farm. I think the question is, though, are they going to continue with this strategy, right? Are they going to
Mm-hmm.
keep bringing out new ships? Because if there really is a new ship every 3 months, I'm basically giving you 1 out of 4 for free. And if you want to try the other three, that's when you need to
Yeah.
consider if a purchase is right for you. Um, I do think that Frontier is going to evaluate this very closely. I'm sure they're going to listen to this. I'm sure they're going to listen to a lot of feedback from the community. I expect that this will continue. I think it will be successful. I think the business case is going to look really strange. The first two ships are going to behave somewhat mixed, and I think that ship 3 and ship 4 are going to show a little bit more performance. And that would be partly because more players are coming back to the community to try these new ships, to see the new content, and partly because we've started to exhaust those really large ARCs balances that are out there. Now, this is a very tired line. I think everyone who has played Elite ever has heard this, but I do genuinely think it's the truth, and that is that there is money to be made in Elite if Frontier can effectively execute on operationalizing it.
Look,
That's a tough one.
I'm in the same boat. You and I have had this discussion many times, especially even amongst the community. We've always heard it. Look, there is definitely money to be made. Personally, I just want to see more ships, more skins. That's one thing that I will happily throw money at. I know that I have 3 cutters, I think ish. Each one of them has a unique skin that I've purchased. Obviously, I got my carrier skin. I've just bought another one because I was getting bored. So I think that I do think that you are right in the way that, like, okay, I didn't really think about the first 2 ships really getting rid of people's arcs balance, so that would make sense. So it'd be interesting to see. Obviously, we just got a sneak peek of ship number 3
Mm-hmm,
for
mm-hmm.
2024. So, no, okay, that makes me really curious. I do want to see, like, okay, obviously, we're going to be waiting for the FY 2024 results, like the paper. So, no, okay, that's pretty fantastic. I didn't really think about it like that. But with that said, do you think that the changes to the Arc Store, and do you really think it's going to bring any substantial profit, or like to the long run? Like, how much do you think this could really benefit them?
That all depends on how far they go with it, right? I mean, the current changes to the Arc Store are interesting, in my opinion, but they're really small, right? I mean, we're
Mm.
talking maybe 2 toes are in the water now instead of 1 toe. I mean, I don't mean to belittle or to say that, I know, exactly what they should do. Of course I don't, right? And
Yeah.
I'm not the guy that's managing the assets for the company or deciding, how my developers are going to spend time, but I've always been a bit of the opinion that offering skins and decals and, just kind of various themes. It's kind of kiddie pool stuff, right? I mean, sure, some people are going to spend more on it and they're going to get different, colored guns or different colored ships, but in the end of the day, that's not going to float an MMO game, right? And that's where this tricky balance for the whole industry exists of what's the right level. On one hand, you could have no monetization at all. That's obviously not going to work unless you're charging a subscription, which people generally revolt against, right? And then on the other hand, in the industry, you have pay to win, right? Where it's, hey, pay me $50 and a, federal farragut will just drop in wherever you want and blow everyone up. I mean,
That's
it's
look.
funny,
If I had to
but it's
pick between them, I would probably go with a subscription.
yeah.
We've all seen a lot of pay to win games. I had one called Arcade. I used to love it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They went for the pay to win strategy, and it's been sold like 3 times before I think they're finally shutting it down or something. I'm not too sure. So, yeah.
Again, it's a really tricky balance. I think so far the way that they've gone about it, I've liked. I really do like this idea of, hey, we're bringing new content into the game. Um, if you pay ARCs, you can experience it first. But if you don't pay ARCs, you still get to experience it, right? Like it's not in some, magical locked away place, and until you pay us, you can't see it. It's coming. Somebody else just gets to play with it for a month or two first. I'm
Yeah.
okay with that.
Look, I will admit, I bought the Python off the rip. I bought the Type 8 off the rip. um, I think it's a good strategy as well. It's You're not limiting anyone. There's no look. The Python Mark II is obviously a good PvP ship, but has fit really well with the Mumber and the FDL. So it's definitely not pay to win. It's Which
No,
I
not at all.
thoroughly
Yeah.
appreciate. And even the Type 8, it is the best medium-sized cargo transporter, even outdoing some of the other ones.
Hmm.
So, but again, I wouldn't see that as a pay to win. It's pay to be better. um, so, yeah, I'm pretty content. I was just really unsure. Like, obviously, we actually saw the Arc store or the processing have a bit of an issue when the Python Mark II originally came out. I heard that multiple people couldn't actually purchase anything. The store went down. Trying to buy currency. So I'm hoping that means that there was people trying to either get the arcs for it or to be able to actually purchase the ship. So I'm hoping that gives us some good, a good bit of revenue for the company.
Yeah, hopefully. I think again it's TBD for them, and I think Frontier internally should be comfortable making a decision probably early to mid 2025, right? That's when they will have functionally exhausted their first commitment, and then they can decide, is it reasonable as a business to make a second commitment? And if so, how big of a commitment should it be? Well, that's all going to be dictated by the performance of this first commitment.
Look, I am obviously still optimistic. I would just be really keen to see this year's financial report, and I'm sure that you and I will sit down for another chat as soon as it comes out. Um, but before we wrap up, look, I don't want to jump into all of Frontier as a whole because we'll probably be here for like another hour. What are some of the improvements you think that they could make to Elite to increase the revenue for it?
Well, there's a lot of directions they could go here, right? It's a wide frontier. Ha, I'm
Ha
terrible.
ha.
I know. I know.
Ah.
I'm terrible. If I was managing the elite team, right, I think that there would be three focuses that I would be really kind of investigating deeper. I think, again, the first one is arcs. Like I mentioned earlier, I like arcs because I think it's a clever way to incentivize your current players to keep playing, but also to give new players or people looking for shortcuts an opportunity to support the game, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that using arcs as a pathway to offer accelerated new features is a compromise the community ultimately is willing to settle for. I think that, while we would love to live in a perfect world where just, it was always equal playing field, I think a lot of people are realizing that there needs to be some monetization for this to make sense for a business. There has to
Of
be,
course.
right? If they're not making money, we're not flying ships. It's pretty simple. The other thing to keep in mind too, though, is ARCS is a really comfortable barometer for the game.
Mm-hmm.
If your volume of ARCS is climbing and the number of people making transactions into the game is climbing, um, obviously the community is enjoying the game, right? If that number is flat, if people aren't paying, the game might not be actively played anymore, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a fun internal tool to measure things. My next thought, which I know has floated around forever, and I think we could probably term this as almost kind of like a BGS expansion, but in reality, it's planetary colonization. I
Ooh.
think one of
Yeah.
the challenges with Elite is there is somewhat of a lack of depth, right? And the Stargoid War has been really exciting because it's been this unexpectedly deep kind of fun mechanic, right? It's gotten kind of out of control. It's kind of been reined back in a little bit, but the community in general really seemed to engage with it off and on, and it was kind of a surprise, candidly, for a lot of us.
Look,
I think.
especially for Argus, like we were caught in the middle of the Indra Titan.
Yep.
Um, yeah, 100%. Like, obviously, during the start, we saw a lot of people engaged. Obviously, they started to wane off when the war was starting to get either a bit too hard, a bit too long. Not exactly, still kind of figuring it out. I think it's a fantastic system. Just could have been fine tuned a little bit, but again, I'm going to be nitpicking at this stage.
Oh, sure. I mean, in general, I think it was quite a bit of fun, right? I think they've done a really good job with it. I'm excited to see them kind of take that bold step. Not everything went perfect, but nothing ever does, you know?
Mm.
I think there's a lot of opportunity though with colonization in that a lot of the assets are already in the game, right? A lot of the BGS states, a lot of the on foot assets you get. I mean, the cookie crumbs are just all over the place, right? The carrier fleet jump map has private enterprise for BGS control status,
Yep.
but that's never existed in the game, you know? So I think that the cookie crumbs are all there. And I think it would kind of provide Elite with this new economic end game, where, if you do have billions and billions and billions of credits like me,
Mm-hmm.
you suddenly have something to spend those credits on. And this kind of gives Frontier an opportunity to leverage a lot of its management sims and bring some of that gameplay into Elite, but it's purely optional, right? If you want to manage your colonies and take care of things and expand them, you can. If you want to go explore for 10 years, go for it, right? It's
Yeah.
still kind of your choice. I think the opportunity for Frontier here, beyond engagement, is obviously you need to limit expansion, right? Like the number of outposts that could be on a planet, maybe the number of outposts in a system, even.
Maybe dictate a bit
Um,
planet size, system size.
right, and
Yeah.
you could probably even preset where those pads would be, so that it would be somewhat standardized, quote unquote. I'm pretty sure the community would be elated to be able to build the existing Odyssey settlements at their whims within confined settlement areas. I think that would be a very reasonable compromise. And then from an ARC's perspective, where Frontier could monetize this a little bit is they could make this labor intensive, right? So, and again, these are just numbers off the top of my head. I don't know, what the curves would look like, but there should be some supply and demand curve work here. But maybe let's say that an outpost I'm going to build for my squad is going to cost me 20 kilotons of 5 different resources and a billion credits. Or I can hire an NPC megaship for 30,000 arcs and they'll come drop it all off and do the construction for me. And then what I would also put in here is I would say you're limited to building, 2 outposts a week. That way, the game does not run into this danger of pay to win, right? Where someone comes in, they're just like, here's $10,000. I now own this entire nebula, right?
Mm. I think that maybe tying. I think I was going to touch on that. Like, definitely offer an arc solution as well. I think
Hmm.
maybe also tying them to squadrons, maybe instead of individual players. But I'm not
I
too
I think that
sure.
would be
It's
an interesting
yeah.
direction. And again, I think that kind of gets back to my first point of anything you offer with arcs should be either a time or an effort bypass, right? I don't really want to see exclusive content. I want to see accelerated content. I think that's totally fair from the
I
community's perspective.
from an accelerated thing that I would like to see, I will happily give them 20,000 arcs to just fill up my engineering materials entirely. Like, cool. Here's 20,000 arcs. I don't want to have to do engineering again. Thank you. I
Yes.
I know you've just received the rework, but for me, it's always just been one of those things. I'm like, I would rather spend my time playing, doing other things in the game. I'm
Right,
not the
right. And I
person.
think that kind of touches on my third idea, which is I do think that in general, um, a lot of the mechanics in the game are pretty grind based and really kind of don't reward you enough, in my opinion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like for example, the economy is a bit of a hanging feature right now. Engineering just got this big rework, and their solution to engineering was like just give them everything, right? Like go scan a single beacon and you get like 9 to 12 G5 mats. that should be signaling there's not enough reward, right? We don't know what we're doing with all this stuff. So I don't have all the answers on what they should do here, but that's where I would say let's get some, storyline or some gameplay investigation into this. Let's see what we can do to make it more exciting for players, because I think that a lot of that has just come down to like I'm space trucking because I can space truck. It's like, well, that doesn't appeal to a broad audience, you know?
Of course. Look, there's a lot to break down here, and yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that they can be doing. I think that you've pretty much nailed it on the head. Of there's definitely things I would like to see. Obviously, like especially when, as you're right, with both the planetary bases, I'd just like to see colonization in general. At the moment, you have all of these terraformable worlds, or even Earth-like worlds that are already ready to be colonized, but they haven't been yet. But we can't do that in the game yet, and that's kind of frustrating. I know that we've taken a few territories. We're like, oh, sick. Maybe we just need to go into a higher boom state or something, and it's just like then we find out, nope, you can't colonize. So I think that'll be pretty awesome. Just from a gameplay perspective, it's just going to be fun.
Mm, I agree. I agree.
Well, with that, thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Thanks for your time, Meryl.